ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our September webinar, Network Leadership Lessons from the Field. This is a webinar series that is hosted by the Center on Network Science at the University of Colorado, Denver and the School of Public Affairs. Just to let you all know, we do have everyone on mute. So if you are having any trouble connecting to the webinar or have any questions logistically or technically, please go to your chat box and list them there. That's where you'll get some information about the webinar and you'll have a chance to ask questions. If your speakers aren't working and things like that, there's someone on hand to answer those questions. So we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit about the Center on Network Science before we get into the actual webinar. We are a center, as I mentioned, in the University of Colorado, Denver. I am Danielle Varda, who is an associate professor in the School of Public Affairs and also the director of our Center on Network Science. We do a number of things at the center. We primarily provide tools and resources for folks in the community who are trying to build their skills in network leadership, whether that be building networks, evaluating networks, or managing networks. We wanted to draw your attention to two of the tools that we offer folks. The first one is our partner tool, which is a social network analysis tool designed about 15 years ago for practitioners. It has a survey and analysis tool and allows you to visualize networks on it. It's a low-cost tool that over 2,500 communities have used, and so we always want to make sure folks know it's a resource for you as well. We're also going to be launching just our person-centered network app, which is a little bit different. It collects data on personal support networks, primarily designed in the context of providers screening clients or people screening other people to try to understand their social support network. So in our pilot testing, we've had researchers using it, we've had school-based folks using it, people within EMS. So a lot of different applications, and we do plan a soft launch. If you're interested in that, please go ahead and take a look at that and let us know that you might be interested and stay on our mailing list for ways that you can use it in the future. Okay, so we just wanted to give a little bit of background on what network leadership is all about. And, you know, we know that the language that people use to think about networks and collaboration varies in many ways. We like to use the term network leadership to talk about a model that we have built and continue to build on that will help people who are part of cross-sector community efforts learn how to build, manage, and evaluate effective networks. In fact, we devote an entire 3 days to bringing people together around becoming better network leaders and learning from each other. We've just announced the dates for our 6th annual Network Leadership Training Academy, which will be May 16th to 18th in Denver. And this brings together largely folks in practice who are trying to figure out how to do this better, but primarily to build skills and think about what the best practices are in this way and learn from one another. So keep an eye out for that. We would love to, of course, always have folks who join us on the webinars come to that. We also wanted to pause for a minute and let you know kind of how we've built this model of network leadership. It's based on a set of core values. These 6 values are ones that we use across all of our network leadership programs and webinars and trainings. And I'm going to go through them real briefly here. But the first one is that is inclusiveness. And by that, we mean that network leadership is not a backbone model. It's not only for people who lead networks. We truly believe that anyone who's involved in a network, whether you are a participant or a leader of it, a manager of it, that you need to and should have opportunities to build skills to be that part of the network. And so we believe it's inclusive, that it's for everyone. We also believe that it should be community and culturally sensitive. So we'll never list the 5 core traits of network leadership or the 3 primary practices. Instead, we know that every network is different. The backstory of it is usually based in some kind of story in a community context that differs, and that there's lots of cultural and other types of factors that influence what makes the way people work together different. And so what we're trying to do is provide tools that allow you to adapt to your own community and cultural differences. And so that's really important to us. All that said, it is skill-based, so we do really focus on the skills that are related to building relationships, primarily across sectors. We focus on things like facilitation and conflict management and evaluation and those kinds of things. And then finally, this last row kind of describes that we have a strong belief that network leadership should be data-driven. Data can be quantitative, it can be a survey, a network survey, a regular survey, qualitative. We just believe that we can't leave managing and building networks to chance, that the more data we have on the people who are involved in them, the better that we can understand perceptions and the way folks interact together, then the better we will be at being network leaders. We encourage folks to be reflective with that data and also adaptive to change based on the things that you learn from the data. So that's kind of our model of network leadership. We did want to point out that our next webinar is set for October 26th. This webinar is titled Effective Practices for Building and Sustaining Networks. We are really pleased that Jenna Bannon from Denver's Early Childhood Council has agreed to come and talk about some of the really innovative work that they're doing with Project Launch and some of the other programs that they have. We think that that's going to be a pretty exciting webinar. And then finally, I think that we're getting closer to full, but our partner tool workshop for this fall is set for October 18th and 19th. So if you're interested in learning about this tool and how to use it and how to interpret the data, please join us for this 2-day workshop here in Denver. And then finally, we always want folks to stay connected. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. If you're going to tweet about these things, we hope that you'll use a hashtag network leaders. A little bit of logistics about the webinar. We are going to have questions for our presenter at the end of her presentation. And so if you would like to queue those up, be sure to keep those in the Q&A box. That should be part of your menu bar that you're seeing either at the top. For some people, it's at the bottom of their screen. It says Q&A. So go ahead and load those in there, and then we'll go over them at the end. I mentioned if you had technical questions, to please go ahead and put those in the chat box. Our webinar will be recorded, and we will offer the slides and any handouts or resources or links that Katie will mention during the webinar. So our goal is to keep everyone connected and provide a lot of resources along the way. So we try to find lots of different platforms for that. All right, and so now it is my sincere pleasure to introduce Katie Edwards, who is the Interim Executive Director of the Nonprofit Centers Network. Katie has worked with the Nonprofit Centers Network since 2012, focused on connecting their membership with the resources they need to make shared space communities successful. They offer a lot of resources and quite a strong community around this work. Katie has a master's in public affairs and nonprofit management from Indiana University, where co-location was part of her coursework. So she's quite an expert in this field and known nationally really for being a leader in the area of shared space. Of course, she's worked on many feasibility studies for developing projects. She's especially interested in shared space and how it can improve and revitalize communities. Katie and the Nonprofit Centers Network has been a partner for us at the Center on Network Science for a number of years now, and we always are finding new and interesting ways to work together. There is just no end of our own collaboration, and this is a great example of it. We've asked Katie to give this webinar today because we're just amazed by the work that they're doing and know that it's going to be a great learning experience. So with that, I want to thank you, Katie, for joining us today, and also turn over the mic to you to get started.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me, Taylor. Some of what we've been learning about collaboration. Thank you for that wonderful bit about community across North America, focusing on how nonprofits can share spaces and services and other ways to really leverage our infrastructure to create a greater impact. We have had a focus on collaboration for many, many years now. And really, as we've tried to unpack this concept, we've come to many tools that are really network leadership tools. So this community is a great fit for us to share what we've learned and to learn from. So let's start with unpacking our name. What is a nonprofit center? A nonprofit center is any physical space, usually a building or a campus, where mission-driven organizations are intentionally sharing space for mutual benefit. And that can range from cost savings to shared programming and really client-centered or client-focused outcomes. Nonprofit centers we see as a subset of this greater field of social purpose real estate, which is really any real estate that has a bigger mission than just securing a profit. So we see all kinds of different social purpose real estate out there, whether it's libraries, museums, public parks. But really, nonprofit centers are looking at creating an affordable commercial space and a toehold in communities for the nonprofit sector. And so you'll hear me talk a lot about nonprofits throughout this webinar, but the tools that I'll be sharing really can apply to anyone who's involved in a network or in a collaboration. And really anytime that people come together, we're looking at some of these tools that can help facilitate goal sharing. So in our work with nonprofit centers, almost all of them say that collaboration is one of their goals. But we know that collaboration doesn't just happen because people move in together. We know that there's a lot more to it than that. And as we have surveyed center managers and we've heard from them anecdotally, most of them aren't happy with the levels of collaboration that they see. Many of our members have a collaboration clause in their lease, or there's a memorandum of understanding that governs kind of the expected behaviors in a space. And collaboration and willingness to share resources is one of those stated goals. However, our center managers have told us over and over that people aren't quite performing to what their expectations were. So we started a peer learning project to start unpacking this. It was called the Collaboration Project. And in 2015, we had a cohort of about 20 nonprofit centers, 20 to 25, that all committed to this idea that comes from design thinking about rapid prototyping. We wanted them to try something different in their centers. We knew that the status quo wasn't getting us where we wanted to be. So let's try something different, anything different. So these center managers worked together on a regular basis to share ideas and then test out design hypotheses and test out these experiments in their spaces. The full report is available for free download from our website if this is a topic that interests you. And there are actually quite a few tools in this publication that can be used by networks and collaboratives in any shape or form, whether you're in a space or not. The first challenge that we came up against with the collaboration project was defining collaboration. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this challenge of what do we mean by collaboration? What are we trying to get at? And there was a lot of disagreement among our practitioners as to what they were headed towards. So together we reviewed a lot of different collaboration continuums out there and adapted them to fit our purposes. And so for some of our centers, their goal for collaboration was on the low end of the spectrum. A network, they're building their networking skills. They're building connections between people for the purpose of helping information flow more freely from one entity or another. We know that collaboration is built on trust, and trust is built on relationships between people. So then as we go up the spectrum, we hit this medium level, this coordinating and cooperating, where people are making modest behavior changes in order to better serve the common good. And then Some people will say that this isn't true collaboration. However, the gains that you can make by coordinating services and cooperating in a network can be incredibly substantial. And then finally, is on the high end. This is kind of the gold standard for most, and it's the area of collective impact, where you are sharing risk and reward and making tangible, measurable outcomes. So all of these different stages are related, and you can be working towards collaboration at any stage in this network. And depending on what your community's needs are, you might only need to focus on the low end of this collaboration scale. That might be all your focus is on. So this is kind of our shared language and our shared definition in our network of what we're looking at when it comes to collaboration. So within the collaboration project, we had so many different prototypes, and they fell into a bunch of different buckets, into three main groups, really. We had individual strategies where center managers went to each person in their network, in their space, and had a one-on-one conversation, did interviews, and mapped out where people's skill sets fit. We had group strategies where people brought their communities together into one room and tried different activities. Some of them were really focused on intensive facilitation, while others were focused on incentivizing collaboration through a funding pool. Then we also had groups that were trying communication strategies to advance collaboration, starting newsletters or listservs, and there was even one really ambitious shared video project that happened. And what we found was the group strategies really were the most effective for the amount of effort that was put in. We saw similar movement in the levels of collaboration in those that did individual and group strategies. But the group strategies were often the most efficient use of the center manager's time. And one of the biggest challenges is that it's hard for people to make time for collaboration unless that goal is very clear. So building on this, we developed this Collaboration Launchpad. It's a facilitated session that NCN staff can come in and deploy within a center community. This is a 4-hour session, bringing in someone from outside to lead your community through structured activities with a core focus on getting to common goals. I recognize that most all of you are not in shared spaces or not planning to create shared spaces. So I want to unpack this toolkit for you and give you pieces that you can employ within your own networks. So one of the first pieces we do with a Collaboration Launchpad is that we are coming in as an external facilitator. And I believe this is a really important piece to working with a network, especially one that's in its nascent stages or one that's kind of gone stale, that's existed for a long time and might be drifting in direction. It's important to use an external facilitator if your current convener has a stake in the outcome, if they are an interested party. And if you're already working within a network, it's likely that you have an interest in the outcomes. Also, if the group has been stuck, it's bringing in an outsider can help change and shift perspectives. Also, when you can benefit from learning some facilitation tools or new ways of thinking, it often helps to have that knowledge coming down from an outside expert. So I really believe in the power of using an external facilitator during this kind of launchpad process. And I think it's one of the pieces that helps it work. And my belief comes from an experiment that I tried in the building where we are housed. We are one nonprofit in a nonprofit center home to about 60 other organizations. And I as I was developing this Collaboration Launchpad tool, I decided to implement one of the exercises at happy hour, which happy hour is the time that people come together in our space. And it was a massive failure. Every other place that I had been and done this, I had been the outside expert coming into a group. And no matter how dysfunctional that group was, they would listen to me because I was an outsider. In my own building, however, everybody knew me. They knew sort of what I did. They knew where to find me, and they'd run into me over lunch a million times. So when it came to a process that I really needed them to pay attention and be willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, I had lost that external credibility. So I really believe in having external facilitators for this process. The next piece of the Collaboration Launchpad is figuring out who should be in the room. We typically are looking for 2 people from every organization, and most nonprofit centers have smaller groups of tenants. They have 12 to 15 different organizations represented within the space. So, and since many of our nonprofit centers either have a vague unification of theme or client service model, or some of them don't have any common shared theme at all, we're looking for innovative ways for people to collaborate. So we want to make sure that the people in the room are your primary points of contact for the collaborative. It's also very important to have someone who's in authority, who's making decision-making power, and someone who's on the front lines. So if there are 2 people that are coming to your collaboration launch, I want the executive director or leader of your organization, and I want the person who will be in the space the most, or the person who's most outward facing. Because those 2 people have very different perspectives on what the objectives of the collaboration of the partnership should be. Getting those perspectives is really crucial to figuring out where collaboration is going to head if you don't already have a clear goal set. So once we've got the right people committed to attend, this is our agenda for the day for a typical Collaboration Launchpad. We start with introductions and an activity called Finding Common Ground. Then we go into some field overview, strategic sharing activities, mapping activities, goal setting, and commitments. So what you'll see throughout all of this is that we're really taking a facilitator's lens to collaboration. And how do we get people to share? Introductions are always important because you need to know people's names and their organizations to figure out how people fit in relation in this larger network. It's hard to work with people if you're just calling them, hey, you. So finding common ground is an icebreaker that I like to use. And it's really focused on getting people to connect at an individual level. Again, collaboration is built on trust, and trust mostly comes between people. So to do this exercise, you want to break a large group up into smaller groups. I like 4 to 5 groups when I'm working with a group of 20 to 30 total. Also, make sure that people who work at the same organization are not on the same group if at all possible. We want to get people connecting to the broader network that's in the room. Once they've introduced themselves to each other, give them a set amount of time, I like 5 minutes, and ask them to find as many things as possible that all of the group members have in common. When I first started using this icebreaker, I thought that you'd probably see 5 to 7 commonalities in the room, and that would include some of the obvious answers. And so I took those obvious answers off the table. You can't have people count, we're all in this room together, as a commonality. We're all attending the same Collaboration Launchpad. And people have surprised me every time that I've used this activity. Once time is called, have people report out how many pieces of common ground that they found in their group. I have found groups that have been able to identify 32 distinct pieces of common ground in the space of 5 minutes. Those groups are really open to sharing and can start to build trust. Pretty much anybody can find common ground if they look hard enough. So from there, once people start talking, I like to bring the focus back to a field overview. For us at the Nonprofit Centers Network, it's usually a presentation about what is possible when nonprofits share space. For most practitioners in this space, their center is the only one for miles around. So by sharing this context and sharing some of the higher performers in the communities in our larger network and some of the other options, it helps people imagine what is possible when they're living together and sharing resources with one another. If you are using this in a different network setting, I'd encourage you to find a needs assessment or do some of the similar peer group sharing so you can see what others are doing who have similar missions. It's important that this information come across as non-biased. It needs to come from the field at large and the problem that you are trying to solve, and not from any one organization's particular agenda. We are trying to work as a network and and set common goals that are common across all of our different entities, and not just focus on one particular organization's agenda. This field overview also helps to create a common language among all of the participants in the room and can give the other activity structure. So as you are mapping out different pieces, you have a bigger context to work from. Then, at that point, after the field overview is done, I as the facilitator are largely done talking. I want other people to start sharing what's going on. And in the strategic sharing section of our agenda, I want to hear about organizational priorities. And since you've usually got a CEO and someone from the frontline staff, it could be an interesting test to see if everybody in their organization is on the same page with their strategic plan, or if they have a strategic plan at all. But it can be really effective because everyone will have their personal priorities in their own role. So that often gives us another lens at which to find shared goals. There's lots of different ways to do this. I particularly like to use speed networking as an option. And speed networking, you're probably familiar with this concept of speed dating, where you and everyone is set at a series of tables where you have two chairs facing one another. You're given 3 to 4 minutes to introduce yourself to your partner and share information about you in speed dating. And then a buzzer rings and you have to move on to the next one. Speed networking takes place on the same format, but then you can, instead of like asking personal information, you are looking for what are your key organization's top 3 priorities, and each person shares. And then we keep moving. So at the end, we ask for a full group report out and ask people to share those goals that they heard, not only their own, but others that were in alignment. So you can start putting those goals up on a wall and seeing where the most population is. I've also done this with one-on-one interviews or small groups. It's important that your facilitator listens to the report outs, because in small group work, you're really, again, trying to build connections between people and strengthen that trust as much as you can in a one-day session. But that reporting out component is key because the full group needs to be brought up. And I like the smaller groups smaller groups setting to then a large report out, because even your introverts get an option to share in this scenario. So your facilitator needs to listen and start clustering answers. And this can be done with flip chart paper or sticky notes or dot voting, but it's important to have a place where people can see where those commonalities of goals are starting to align. When we work with human services focused centers, which about a third of our network is composed of one-stop centers designed to make it easier for people to access needed human services, I like to use this tool called client-focused mapping. And I'll explain it and then show you a picture or a representation of what this can look like. So in client-focused mapping, again, you ask everyone in the room to think about the person that their organization serves. A typical client, someone that comes in regular, someone that they know their story. And then I give everyone 6 sticky notes. I have them write down 3 things that typical client hopes for. What are they trying to accomplish? What are their big picture goals? And what are the 3 things that they need to achieve those goals? So as individuals in my group will share out their hopes and their needs, we collect them on a large map or a sticky wall. Then, once all these answers are up on the wall, we can see which organizations offer the needed services and also the gaps. So in this scenario, this is my basic facilitator map. We cluster the hopes in the center so you can see what those typical clients are trying to do. And you'll see a lot of similarities in human services shops about who they're trying to serve, whether it be low-income individuals, people experiencing homelessness, families, and children. There's a lot of commonality there. And then in this second ring, that's where we place the needs. What are the things that those people need? Whether it's meals on the table, access to medical care, help navigating the system. So once all of the hopes and the needs are on this map, we start in the outer ring adding in the organizations who are in the room. So you can really clearly see, all right, do you have a transportation assistance organization at the table? Do you have case managers at the table? And where are those pieces that are in alignment? I also keep a space on this wall for the unmet needs so that we can see what's not at the table or what's not being provided in the space. What I would love to do with this activity in the name of inclusivity is to actually have clients or partners interviewed or be able to share in the room of what they actually need. We haven't been able to incorporate that component in terms of just the time in the day, but I think that kind of perspective would help make this tool better for groups using it. So once you've mapped out where people are headed, their strategic goals, personal goals, and built trust among partners, I end the day with this component of making commitments. This is a really powerful piece because you have spent, at this point, about 3 hours working with the different voices in the room and asking them to reflect on what they're seeing, where this collaboration is headed, and how it might work. So at the end, we bring everybody back together in a circle and go one by one, having people share why their network matters, why the center matters, and what they commit to do to support the network. And this has been possibly the most powerful exercise in terms of the center manager's eyes, because our contacts and the people that we exist to serve are usually one or two people within an organization that has been appointed to manage the shared space. In addition to all the facility stuff, they are doing all of the programmatic activities and all of the collaboration-related activities within the space, which is a lot to do with a staff of 1 to 2 people. In this commitment component, all of a sudden we are asking the others in the community to start taking responsibility for what goes on. And it has been really fascinating to see what people will volunteer to do. In one center I worked, did a collaboration launchpad during this phase. We had 3 people volunteer to start setting up a case managers sharing session, essentially a support group for the case managers that they realized worked in the building, that they could come together and talk about challenging moments in their days and their careers. So building in a lens of self-care and support that their smaller organizations didn't have the number of staff to execute. We've also seen people commit to creating groups that will focus on celebrating the culture within the space, welcoming new tenants, welcoming new people that are working in the space, and helping celebrate the successes that are going on a day-to-day basis. It's important that your facilitator take note of every single commitment as it comes down. And sometimes it's helpful to get another volunteer or a second facilitator to help scribe and capture those commitments, because commitments allow for accountability, and then you are able to transfer those commitments into increased action. So I've gone through a lot of different facilitators tools, and you're probably wondering, okay, Katie, does this really matter? Like, we put everybody in a room and we've run them through a whole bunch of activities that may or may not give them flashbacks to summer camp, but does it work? What I'm showing you now is a tool we like to call the Collaboration Snapshot. And each different color bar, this chart is a little overwhelming, but I have yet to find another way to present the data that showcases it as well. We ask every organization in the space about all the other organizations and what their level of interaction is with them. The light gray on the left, light green gray on the left side is never heard of them. We don't know who these other organizations are. Purple is we know who they are, but we've never had any interaction with them. The orange band is, well, we know folks there, and we'll network and we will share information. Green, the darker green, is we actually coordinate services. We cooperate with one another and we'll change our behavior to accommodate the other entity. And then this dark purple is the collective impact band. These are ones where we are actively sharing risk and reward. So this is what one of our clients looked like before the Launchpad process. Then 2 weeks later, we asked them to do the same survey. So this is after the Launchpad. All of a sudden, there's a lot fewer of these light green bars. This never heard of them has pretty much gone away. And what's interesting is those that still have folks that never heard of the other entity weren't able to participate in the Launchpad for the full morning. A lot of these groups were only able to attend for a part of the day. We've seen a huge increase in this purple band of we know who they are, but we haven't had that much interaction. And we've also seen an increase overall in this orange band. We start sharing contact information. This case was also really interesting in the kinds of opportunities that had come out. In this shared space, they had lots of human services that were on site during the weekday, but they also had 2 churches that met there over the weekends. And so this session was one of the few opportunities that most of the executive directors had to meet the ministers because they were finally in the same space on the same days. One of the needs that came out was that pretty much all the human services organizations were desperate for volunteers. They were looking for new ways to engage their small community to help serve all the people that were coming to the space. And the 2 ministers had 2 churches that were full of volunteers that were looking for new ways to give back. So after the Launchpad, all of a sudden they started sharing opportunities throughout these different congregations, and they saw an influx of volunteers into their programs. So the things that we don't see here is an increase in this collective impact sphere. Most of the focus is on the lower levels of collaboration, and that's what we expect to see after a 4-hour session. Those higher impacts of collaboration need more time and more trust to develop. But we see this Collaboration Launchpad strategy as a way to start building those lower level bonds of trust that will make higher levels of collaboration partners possible, strengthening the network. So with all of the partners that we work with, we are really asking them to reconcile their roles. Shared spaces typically have really strong leaders, and they're strong community personalities and people who have a long history that can pull these collaborative facilities together. But once you're in the space, it's important to shift that role from strong leader to strong facilitator. This role is much more appropriate given the goals of collaboration in this space. And you have to start thinking less about a top-down leadership structure and more about how do we weave the network and weave the connections between the people who are in this space on a day-to-day basis. So when we leave as an external facilitator, it's important that our center manager, the person that we organize this with, takes on that role of network facilitator. That person who sets the expectations and tone for the conversation, but doesn't do everything for everybody else. You as the network facilitator need to be that neutral convener, someone who can help but doesn't dominate the conversation. It's important to really practice active listening and ask open-ended questions that keep the conversation flowing and provide the space for your network partners to volunteer to take their own leadership. You are more of an enabler than a doer in this role of network facilitator. It's also important for you to model effective participation and sometimes be the first follower. I don't know if anyone on the call may know what I'm talking about, but there is an excellent video on YouTube about the power of the first follower. And you'll know it when you see a lone nut dancing in a public park. And it talks about that lone nut is really your innovative leader. But what makes him a leader isn't that he's out there doing this crazy dance on his own. It's that someone stepped up and followed. And so as a network facilitator, people may want to look to you as always the leader, but it's important for you to signal when to follow and supporting the other volunteers in your network as they are starting to take up leadership roles. If they want to start a jam session or a petition signing event, help them make the space for it, help them get the word out, but don't do it all for them. And then show up on the day of and support them in that role. So sometimes your network facilitator is a supporter, is a follower, and it shouldn't always be the one who executes all the activities. So in summary, why should you do a Collaboration Launchpad? When is this set of activities or any of these activities useful. I find it really helpful in my network when you're trying to set or reset the tone of collaboration. Most of the groups that we work with in this Collaboration Launchpad format are in their first 1 to 2 years of opening. However, I feel like these tools can also be tweaked and applied to more established communities, more established networks. Over time, even when your organizations stay in partnership, the people at those organizations change, and their understanding of why you're working together in a network might be shifting and changing. Also, your goals might be shifting and changing in response to external factors. Collaboration launchpads and these kinds of activities help set goals and commitments, and they allow us to really dig deep and connect with why we do the shared work that we do, and not just the day-to-day grind, not just the day-to-day deliverables that you're trying to get done. It carves out the space to think about that bigger mission and why we're working in the way that we are. Also, it helps build norms. If a collaborative doesn't have norms, it's really hard for them to work together effectively. And finally, it helps you hold each other accountable. You remember how I was talking about that round of commitments. Not only does your network facilitator hold those commitments, but so does everybody in that room who observed the commitments being made. So all of a sudden, it's no longer one person holding the community accountable. It's the community holding the community accountable. And that is a very powerful tool. So with that, I will open it up to questions if there are any. I know that was a lot of ground to cover in a short period of time. Danielle, are you there? And so if I remember the protocol appropriately, any of those questions are to go into the Q&A box.
Hi, Katie. This is Melinda. I'm not sure if Danielle's maybe having trouble getting on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay, Melinda.
Okay, great. Well, I'll go ahead and just share some of the questions that we have so far. So one question says, what examples do you have of collaborations for community organizing purposes rather than for service provision? I work with a collaboration who works towards community inclusion efforts, so it's not necessarily about providing services / meeting unmet needs, i.e. clients, just doesn't quite fit.
Absolutely. So I would say about 1/3 of our members are really focused on that one-stop service provision lens. And the other 2/3 are looking more for other mission fits. So we are, so I would say 1/3 of ours has a clear, another 1/3 of our membership has a clear mission that they are working towards. And the other 1/3 is still trying to figure out what that unifying factor is. So depending on where your community is, changes the activities that I would recommend. I would still recommend a mapping activity in this kind of community in your focus where you're looking at community inclusion efforts. I would start looking at, what are you are the experts in it in and of itself. And if I was designing this for you, I'd be asking a lot to build up my knowledge. And then we'd start thinking about, where is the community being inclusive, who is being included, and who isn't at the table. And I'd be asking the people at the table to start identifying, who's there, who is not, and what do we need to do that moves those folks closer to being included. So there's lots of ways to visualize this, and I'd have to learn a little bit more about your particular network area to make better recommendations. But start thinking about how can you map this in different ways. What are the ways that you can put it up on the wall to see who's in and who's out. I've also used kind of a bullseye tool and a fishbone diagram, both of which you can Google facilitation tools for bullseye diagram or fishbone diagram, and those can be used to kind of break down bigger problems into its subsequent parts, and then you can see where your partners might address one of those different parts.
Hey, Katie, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there earlier. Thanks, Melinda. So there's a number of other questions, and I just want to remind everyone to put your questions in the Q&A box. We see some popping up over in the chat box, so we're trying to get them all in one spot. So let's see how many we can get through before our time's up. So here's another one with a comment that this was awesome. Wondering about the mapping need exercise on the Launchpad. If you're bringing people together to collaborate around a research question or other issue, rather than a more obvious maybe client user scenario, how would you adapt the exercise?
Absolutely. So it's kind of similar to the previous question, but I would start looking at kind of that shared goal, shared mission component and figure out, what are the subsequent parts? If you are working at a collaborative that's focused on climate change, we know that that's a really complex issue. So start by breaking it down. In your collaborative, you will have amassed a group of subject matter experts. So start mapping their strategic priorities and how they are trying to address that climate change and start grouping it out on a map. I wish I could show you all the hand gestures that I'm making to illustrate this point. But I always start sketching out my facilitations on a blank piece of paper. And if I wanted to use this mapping exercise, I would replace the kind of ideal hopes of the clients in the center with that shared problem that we're working on. Climate change in my example. And then I'd start ringing the outside with the subparts of that challenge. And then I'd start mapping where my different partners are working in relation to those subcomponents and build from there. That way you can see the gaps, but also you can figure out where there's a cluster of organizations that are all working around the same piece, and then they can kind of move off and focus on ways to streamline and coordinate their efforts in a better way.
Excellent. I wanted to note that there's a number of comments that this was excellent, clear, and practical, other things like that. So lots of input that way. So there's a couple of questions about the Launchpad data, the before and after survey. So one question is, how long does it take? Another one asked if there is access to it for the audience. Can they get access to that survey?
So it's super easy. It's a super easy survey, and I can share the 5 kind of points that the questions that they can answer. And it's set up in a grid format. So on one side of the grid, I just do it in SurveyMonkey, I list all of the organizations who are participating in the collaborative. And then across the top of the grid, it's 5 choices. And everyone who's going to participate in the Launchpad has to tick one of those boxes. Each one is required. There's also a box for, this is my organization, so NA. So you've got answers of, I have no interaction with the group, I have heard of them, but I have no interaction, I network with that organization or their staff, I coordinate services with them, and then the last one is, I share risk and reward with that organization. We are working towards a collective impact model. So I'm happy to share it with that. But it's important to customize it based on your community. The whole survey for that depends on how many partners you have, but it typically takes 5 to 10 minutes max.
Great. And we'll send out that kind of resource. Someone, again, asked to get about the slides again. And I just wanted to add the video that you mentioned is called Leadership Lessons from the Dancing Guy on YouTube. And Melinda put a link to it in the chat box already if folks are interested in checking it out. I share the sentiment with Katie that it is a must-see if you're going to be managing networks. Okay, so another one, do you have experience using this with online communities?
That is a great question, and to be absolutely honest, I have only used this set of tools in person with in-person communities. We do lead a community of practice that is all virtual. It meets by Zoom video conference, and we've tried to use different kinds of facilitation exercises there. It's just trickier to adapt them to that kind of community. Video conferencing helps so you can see faces and hear voices, but it's still not quite the same as the in-person component. And I am always open to better tools for online communities, and I'm always trying to think of ways to adapt these activities to in person. I have done the hopes and some of the client mapping and some of my sticky note activities using Google Docs and virtual sticky notes, but it is not as smooth as actually working in a room with a group of people.
Great. So there's kind of two related questions about recruiting folks. So how do you identify potential partners, convince them to come to the table? Similar question said, how do you set the purpose of the initial convening in a way that attracts people to participate, but not so specific that it excludes people or doesn't leave room for the network to define its own purpose?
Yeah, so one of my advantages with the communities that I work with are that they're building-based communities. So the folks that we are working with have already committed to sharing space with a purpose with the others in the room. These are people that you're going to see in the hallways on a day-to-day basis. But we do address those questions in some of our feasibility studies and like who should be at the table. So we often start with a visioning exercise, and we start with partners who have some history of working together or have some knowledge of each other. And we convene them by inviting them to a conversation to address what our community's biggest needs are. And we intentionally keep it very vague, building on some of those strengths of relationships that have already been established. But we start the conversation as a vague conversation. It's an invitation-only conversation, and build from there. People always get hung up on this idea of who do we start this collaboration with, and how do we make sure that everybody who should be at the table is at the table. And the truth of the matter is, right off the bat, not everyone is the right people won't always be at the table. However, you got to rethink that definition of right. The right people to have at the table for collaboration are those that see the value in collaboration. Start with the group of people who are willing to jump in and start problem solving, and really look at that bigger picture. And once you've got that coalition of the willing established, pause and step back and see who's missing, especially when you're looking at the people who have the lived experience of the problem that you're trying to solve. There's a great saying that says, nothing for us without us. And so it's important, especially those of us who come from the nonprofit sector and come from this model of charity, to make sure that we are pausing that conversation to reach out to those folks that we need to engage.
Excellent. We are at the top of the hour, but I'm going to squeeze in one more quick question. There's a number of them still in here, but this one I think is specifically good for you, Katie. How important do you find co-location to be successful for collaboration, joining in a center?
Yeah. Co-location is incredibly helpful to working in partnership, but it's not entirely required. And many of our shared spaces also have programs that go beyond their walls, especially if they have a focus on literacy or international development or some of these more clear-cut mission alignments. So we really see as co-location as kind of, and shared infrastructure as kind of a Swiss Army knife that can be a tool to be used to advance multiple ends. Collaboration is one of those ends, increasing efficiencies and effectiveness is a different tool and a different reason that groups can co-locate. So it's an important, it can be helpful to you if you find the right community. And it can be helpful to you in lots of different ways. It's important to really think clearly about why you want to share space and other resources. But there are lots of other ways to collaborate and to work in a networked way with other organizations.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Katie, for your fantastic presentation. There are a number of questions that we didn't go and get through, so we'll see if we can address those in another way, but we just want to also thank everyone for taking time today to attend this webinar with us. We are always hopeful to build a community of people in practice and research and evaluation all doing this work together. We feel like together we will be greater at learning and being successful. So we look forward to having everyone join us next month. And again, Katie, thanks again for joining us today and sharing all this great experience with us.
Absolutely. My contact information is on the screen. If anyone else has follow-up questions that we didn't get to, I'm happy to answer those one-on-one.
Great. Okay, thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.